Uh, yeah. So, do you have a dog in that fight on Sunday? Who do you have in the Super Bowl? Are you
Dude,
stoked
I'm
either way?
torn. So I'm a Giants fan, which means I want the Chiefs to win. But if the
Right.
Eagles win, it makes our conference look good, which it hasn't looked good in like a decade.
I always used
So
to have that logic too. Like as a Giants in baseball, like as a Giants fan, do you root for the Dodgers like when they make the like I don't
yeah,
know. It's so hard. I'm sure to root for the Eagles at anything. But anyway, Mike, welcome to the podcast. And hey,
thank you.
I already did your intro, so we can jump right into it. But um, you're in New York. You said you're a Giants fan, and I heard you in another podcast say you're just north of the city by like an hour. Where are you at?
Yeah, I'm right near White Plains in Westchester County. So like a 45-minute train ride to Manhattan.
Yeah, I'm moving like probably 20 minutes from you. We close on a house in Nyack next Friday.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Congrats,
So
dude. That's awesome. We'll have to get lunch or
thank you.
something.
There you go. Well, welcome to the podcast. I had you on for a very specific reason. I've got a background in both entrepreneurship, but also corporate sales, corporate leadership. I built some big sales teams. I definitely want to hear about your background prior to
Sure.
this and like how you made this transition into, kind of being a productivity expert and when it comes to sales and not just that you did that, but I feel like you did it in the most hardcore way. It would almost be like if someone wasn't into working out and then they were like the CrossFit champion of the world or something. I mean, doing door to door like coaching is like as tough as it gets. But tell us a little bit about your backstory before we get into that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting, dude. Like if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I feel like it's
Mhm.
like a scatter plot. Like it's
Yeah.
tough to read between the lines and figure out what the hell's going on. Um, but the spark notes of it is uh my college choice was based on where I could play soccer in college. Then I dumb lucked my way into a computer engineering degree and I went straight down to Wall Street and I wrote code professionally for 7 years.
Okay.
And because to me at the time, like all I wanted to do was make a lot of money, retire young, and open a pit bull rescue foundation. Like that was all I cared about as a kid. And my college search was literally going to my guidance counselor. I would bring them a list of all the college coaches that would be at these showcases for my soccer team. And we would go through and we would highlight the coaches at like good schools, right? Based on my academic portfolio, or whatever the heck it's called, like
Yeah.
your transcript, right?
Transcript. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then because my parents were very supportive of like, hey, go play in soccer or in college, but use it to get into a better school. You're not going D1 for the sake of going D1 and getting a useless piece of paper.
Right.
And in those conversations, it was like, okay, well, do engineers make a lot of money? And they said yes. So I did it. So I wrote code professionally. During that process, very linear growth. Every year was big pay raise, big promotion. Like I was the youngest senior engineer on the team at this global company by the age of like 25. Next one was probably like a decade older than me. So I had this 6-figure salary. I had just this senior title, the luxury apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, like all the shit that you think that you want, right?
Hmm.
All the vanity stuff. And I was really quickly figuring out what anxiety and debilitating panic attacks were. And that was kind of, we can dive into however much of that you want, but ultimately, after a year and a half of that journey, and like kind of figuring out that a lot of it stemmed from the fact that I had no idea what it meant to be productive, that cracked the door open. And I started going down the rabbit holes. About a year and a half later, I met Brendan Burchard, world's leading high performance coach.
Yeah. I know
Hearing the
him.
terms high performance, that kind of like gave me permission because that's the lens that I looked at life through. Whereas
So
like,
I apologize, but can I pause you
yeah,
for a second? So like if I'm reading right in your background, so this was somewhere around like 2017-ish, right? Something like that.
no, it was way earlier. Well, first panic attack was January 1st, 2014.
Okay.
A year and a half after that, I kind of figured out the productivity piece and I went down the rabbit hole for another year and a half. I want to say I met Brendan no earlier than 2015, probably 2016,
Okay.
because I built this company as a side hustle for a year and a half before I took the leap.
While
And
you
I
were
took
still
the
in
business.
engineering, you were
Yeah.
building this. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. This was the third company I started while I was in corporate. Um, The first two failed miserably because of the anxiety and panic attack
Sure.
experiences, which is a whole different story. But I ended up leaving corporate September of 2018.
Why did you pick this avenue? I know performance became something that you liked, but
Yeah.
it's, I mean, you know better than anybody. You've probably been asked this question a lot too, but I don't peg most engineers as being sales productivity experts, right? Although I
Yeah.
get it. I do get the analytical part of it because my brain works that way as well, right? So many calls are going to
Totally.
equal so many appointments, and like good sales process definitely pay off. But at the same time, the actual act of selling, normally that personality type is not the same one writing code, right? Like, so
Yeah. Yeah. It was
why
a
did
weird,
you pick
yeah,
that avenue? Yeah, like that just seems like such a departure, from where you've been.
totally. Totally. So if I'm being honest, Ken, I don't think that I really belonged in the engineering world.
Right.
Um, and to be honest, I think the only reason that I went as like grew as quickly as I did in it was because of my communication skills.
Right.
So some other context I didn't share with you. Number one, my first job growing up, like I sold retail for over a decade from 8th grade through the beginning of my software career because that was unpaid at the beginning. So um, that got me in the sales world. It got me communicating. The first of the three companies I started, I spent 5 years in the network marketing industry. So that furthered
Got
that.
it. Okay. So there's
Um,
more to that background than what you see.
yeah,
What was causing, I mean, you said the panic attacks were coming from productivity or a perceived lack of productivity. Did I get that right?
kind of. So I fell headfirst into the toxic hustle mindset,
Mm-hmm.
which I think it serves us until it doesn't. And eventually I was really quickly finding out what it was like when it didn't. Right. So after experiencing that first attack, that put me on a year and a half of like going to the doctors, getting my chest x-ray, doing the breathing tests. Like this is 2014. It wasn't cool to talk about mental health on social media.
Right.
Right. And I didn't know what any of these things were. Like I thought there was a physiological issue, right? I thought my lungs didn't work. And being an engineering nerd that I am, it was like, okay, well, why am I feeling this way? And I
Right.
realized that 100% of the attacks happened in a moment where I felt guilty for not working. So the
So
next
so
question,
that's what was happening in the moment. You were like just
yeah,
all this stress, like I'm forgetting something, or I should really be over there, and then that just kind of built on itself.
yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So I'm like, okay, well, how do I avoid that? And I realized that the two drivers in this experience that I was having was number one, I had a really unhealthy mindset around what it actually took to get where I wanted to go. Right. And then number two, if I could build that healthier mindset and then pair it with showing up more powerfully when I was working, I might not feel so shitty when I wasn't. So
Right.
those were the two moving pieces. And that's where I realized that for me, like I was that guy that it was just like being busy, checking things off a to-do list, getting things done. And I had no idea that like sounds so silly to say, but like I genuinely didn't understand that doing things doesn't matter if
Right.
the things you're doing don't matter.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think I'm curious. I want to stay on this for a minute if it's all right, because I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, did this come from something in your upbringing, like with your parents? Because I know I have a little bit of what you're talking about, and it's never gone to the point of full-blown panic attacks, but I've
Yeah.
been known to not be able to relax that well, right? Like during downtime. And sometimes that can be okay, because sometimes that is a true love for the work. It's not just like guilt or whatever. It's just like, hey, I've got a great
Totally.
idea and I want to get it out. Another part of it though is how I was raised. I think when I was a kid, where it's, I love a vacation as much as anybody, but after a couple of days, I'm like, can we like just get something going here? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I feel a little too weird if I'm too far away for too long. And I do feel like that has a little bit to do with my dad, my relationship with my dad, and him kind of pushing us when we were younger, and that being a little bit of his mentality, and it passed down. And not that that's a bad thing. There's 90% of that is good, but there's an
Yeah.
element of it, like in your case, if it's taking you to panic attacks or being debilitating, that could be a problem. But do you trace it back to there, or is it just no? Was it more internal?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ken. And to be honest, I don't I think back often as to like how I was parented
Right.
because I'm like really, I don't know, maybe this is a selfish like way to think about it, like or narcissistic way to think about it, but like I think my parents did a pretty damn good job, you know, and
Hmm.
like I always think back to why and how, especially in the stage of life that I am. Like I got married last year. We don't have children yet, but when that does happen, like I want to do that effectively, of course,
Right.
right? And so I think about this stuff often. And to answer your question, I don't think like I definitely did not grow up with parents who were like always like it was never enough and like pushing. Like
Right.
even to this day, like it's almost the opposite, which I think that's actually fairly common in the entrepreneurial space. It's people telling me to work less, people telling
Right.
me to
Slow
slow
down.
down.
Hmm.
Which again also comes out of love. So I don't think it came from the upbringing. I don't know where it came from. It's
Right.
almost like this self-imposed like desire for like wanting to go faster.
Well, I think
And
it's
I
our
don't know.
blueprint, right? Like you started
Yeah.
saying like, and I heard you on another podcast or a couple talking about this, where we all have this definition in our heads of success, right? And I think as
Yeah.
guys in our, at that time in your 20s, going, well, the definition of good, the definition of success, wherever that came from, right? Like whatever, that you following Elon Musk or having friends or going to Wall Street or whatever it was, the definition of success is work your ass off and make more money, right? To some degree, I'm
Yep.
not defining yours. I'm just saying hypothetically. And so that's what we chase. And however that was put into our heads, right? Through our environment, through our own doing or whatever. And it's good that you figured out, I think, at a young age that that wasn't fulfilling. Right. And so what,
Yeah.
so yeah, continue. I kind of side railed you there, but so you go through the panic attacks, but you get introduced to Brendan Burchard, who I'm a big fan of. I've been to a couple of his events. Great guy.
Yeah.
So tell me what happens next.
Yeah. So meeting Brendan was like kind of that permission moment. You know, like I feel like in life, we're really just waiting for permission to take that next step to execute whatever it is. And that was that moment for me because to be honest, dude, like I was avoiding the coaching industry like the plague
Yeah.
because back then I didn't understand what this whole like adult coaching world was. I came up from the athletic world where coaches had the solutions, right? In the adult world, that's called consulting.
Right.
And I couldn't understand why there were a bunch of 17-year-olds on Instagram with life coach in their Instagram bio, and I didn't want to be associated with it at all.
Right.
Even though some of my best friends in the world, literally my best man in my wedding, I distinctly remember having conversations with him on Google Chat because it was the only thing. He was like one of two people I communicated with on Google Chat, and I could get away with having it open when I was working my corporate job, right? But I neglected it because I didn't want to be associated with it. Whereas I meet Brennan, I hear the words high performance, and that's a lens that I could look at things through. I could
Mhm.
rationalize that. So I wrote my first program on the flight home from that event. It was called Fear Hacking Academy. It's still the structure of a lot of what we do in our programs. But that was the start of it. And then I built it as a side hustle for a year and a half. I did some beta programs and eventually I ended up jumping off a cliff trying to figure out how to fly. And it's that was September 2018. And yeah, it's been crazy ever since. Obviously, like you mentioned, we work in the door-to-door sales niche right now primarily.
Yeah.
Um, First door-to-door client was in December of 2019. And then yeah, COVID really helped niching into that. Not to sound in sensitive, but all of our other clients got crushed in our other industries, whereas door-to-door went through the roof. So it really helped our company to niche in and like listen to what was happening in the market. And it's been a rocket ship ever
And so
since.
when
So
you're working door to door, is it, individuals that are going online and buying your programs? Is it organizations that are signing their entire, team or org chart up on, or how does that work with you guys?
both. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we started in what I would call B2C, even though it's
Hmm.
technically B2B. Like if you're in sales, you're your own business, right?
Yeah.
Um, but when I say B2C, I'll say like individual reps.
Yeah.
So that's where we started. And over the last year or so, we've been really moving into the B2B realm where we can scale our impact that way. So to this day, like we have both. We have teams that invest on the entire company's behalf. And we have individuals that are investing on their own behalf. And we're doing the same work with all of them. It's like things like time management, energy management, understanding the numbers in the business so that you can really play the numbers and leverage the data instead of just being one of those people that says sales is numbers and assumes that you just have to pump more volume without having any idea what you're doing and how to do it effectively. So those are some of the gaps that we're filling. And in the door-to-door world, those are just gaps that are very common. And when you're selling something like solar, that's, average commission can be anywhere from like 5 to 10 grand a deal. We add a couple extra deals a month and it's a really solid ROI.
So what do you notice when people come to you guys? What are the most common things that they're looking for? And I know you don't want to give too much away in your programs, but I'm sure there's common threads here. Is it disorganization, time management? Like what are the things that you're seeing? Let's start with the reps. And I also want to talk about leadership and what you guys do there.
Yeah, well, the number one thing that everybody wants is consistency. Like that's the number one word that we hear in the DMs, that we're hearing on calls. It's what everybody wants, right? And it makes sense because they're commission only. So of course they want consistency, but what they need is consistency of output. Right. Not the consistency of the income.
Well, that's why I was smiling because when you said it, because it's like almost like an oxymoron. It's like, I want to be in commission sales, but gee, I'd love it if everything was guaranteed, And it's like, well, you can go back to your 60K salary job if you want, or you can do this. And some months are going to be 15, 20K and some are going to be nothing. But what you can control and what I've always said is your outputs, right? Like your job is to pick up the phone X amount of times or make so many presentations. So yeah, please continue. Yeah, it's definitely speaking my language.
So bingo, like, dude, that's the name of the game. So we always hear like we need to abstract out from the outcome, but how do you do that in sales? Like that's really cute to say, but it's really freaking hard when you need a check that's not guaranteed. Right. And I intentionally put that in air quotes because salaries aren't either, but that's a whole different conversation. Right. But really, the easiest way for us to abstract away from that outcome is to have a massively fat pipeline. Right. And we do that through consistent output. So consistent door knocking, consistent cold calling, consistent DM sliding, like making those things non-negotiable. Right. And once that happens, once we understand that concept, then it uncovers everything else. Like what is actually getting in the way of the consistency? For a lot of the guys, at least in the door-to-door world, are guys and girls that are knocking doors for a living. They're calling the day short, or they're driving up to Hood, but they don't get out of the car because they get that one email that they feel like they have to answer in that moment, like a false emergency. And if they don't do it, that deal's going to blow up and the deal's so expensive and it's not going to blow up, but they think it is in the moment. Right. So they answer that one email and then all of a sudden, before they know it, they're 37 cat videos deep on YouTube shorts or TikTok or Instagram. And they've missed 2 hours of primetime knocking. Right. We tell these stories in our head about like, oh yeah, and I'll keep using door knocking because that's what we're speaking about, but sub out the like action item. It doesn't really matter, right? It could be cold calling, it could be anything. They're like, oh, I knock about 50 doors a day. It's like, cool. Well, how many did you knock yesterday? Well, yesterday I had a bunch of appointments and like, I knocked 5 doors. Like, okay, what about the day before? Well, I had a doctor appointment and you don't understand. Like it's like, cool. So you're not knocking 50 a day. Right. You need consistent output. And then it becomes a productivity conversation. Then it becomes an energy management conversation, how we're handling the rejection on the doors, not calling the day short, not sitting on a park bench. Then it becomes those pieces. But the thing that we need is the consistent output. And that needs to be non-negotiable.
I love what you're talking about. So my company behind the Leaders Lab is I actually own a leadership recruiting company, right? So we place leaders with companies. And one of the biggest metrics, and this, and then when I was in the corporate world, I had sales teams as large as like 1,000, right? So I've hired and interviewed and trained like tons of sales reps. Yeah. And I used to always say, look, to me, there's an art of selling and there's the science of selling. And the science of selling to me is what we're talking about right now. And it's going to account for literally about 80% of your success, which is knowing your numbers, being disciplined, having a calendar, working the calendar, and just going like, look, if I know, see, I think you can back your way into certainty if you're a sales rep, meaning if I know that I need to close 3 deals a month in solar at, $7,000 a deal or whatever to make my nut or whatever I need, right?
Mhm.
And I know that it's going to take, I don't know, let's say it's 10-1 on appointments to close a deal. So now I know I need 30 appointments. And then I know it's
Yep.
20 phone calls to get an appointment. Then I know it's going to, or door knocks. And now I know it's going to be 600 door knocks that I got to make. And I know there's 20 working days in the month. That's 30 door knocks a day, period. And
Mhm.
if you look at it, I think it's funny because sometimes I'll talk to somebody about this kind of stuff, and an athlete gets that about being an athlete. Like an athlete understands that you're only as good as like today's workout. The reason they don't not work out today isn't because they're going to look different or even feel different if they don't do it. It's because it's part of who they are. And, one slip leads to another slip, needs to another slip, and pretty soon you're not in shape anymore. And so
Yep.
an athlete does it every day because that's who they are. And I think the better sales reps figure out at some point that it's so easy to trick yourself in sales because most of the time you do hear no, even if you're great. So chances are the next thing you do doesn't matter. You're right.
Yeah.
Except that it does, because it sets the precedent for the next thing, which sets the precedence for the next thing and the next thing. And so to me, there's a certainty in making those 30 calls. I know if I make the 30 calls every day, I'm going to get the however many appointments, which is going to lead to so many closes, which is going to lead to my money coming in when I need it to. And
Mhm.
yes, that might vary a tiny bit month to month, but it'll work itself out in the end,
100%, dude. Knowing those numbers can give you so much confidence.
Yeah.
And I think a really important thing for people listening to understand is that like they also have to have the ability to zoom out. And what I mean by that is like we can't just look at the micro of the day. So let's say the math is 30 calls and you expect to book maybe 2 appointments out of that. Well, if you get to 30 calls and you've only booked 1 appointment, like that doesn't mean that we suck all of a
Right.
sudden. It just means that tomorrow's 30, you might book 3. Like the numbers
Right.
even out over the long term. But
Totally.
once you have that data, like one of the things that we do for our clients, and people can go and build this sheet for themselves, but it's like, okay, so in solar, for example, there's 6 major steps of the conversion process that we care about, going from door knocked to deal installed, which is when we get most of the money, right? So those would be like door knocked, decision maker spoken to, appointment set, appointment sat, deals closed, deals installed.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have trackers that we capture all of that historical data. As the bigger the data set, the more valuable it will be, right? Because then we have a bigger pool, we can zoom out a whole lot more, and we get really clear conversions over the history of the actions, right? So we could say, okay, we have percentages at conversions of every step, right? Which will, number one, uncover bottlenecks, because you might see, wow, my appointments are not sticky at all. I'm only sitting with 25% of the people that I'm setting. And if I can get that to 50, I'm going to double my conversions and double my income before I even knock a single extra door, right? So the bottlenecks become very apparent and very powerful. But then there's another part of the sheet that's like, okay, well, I want to have 50 installs a year, for example. And let's say I'm making, $5,000 an install on average. So that means that my goal income for the year is 250K. And since we have all of the historical conversion data, we can literally spit out what our volume needs to look like.
Exactly. Yep.
And as long as those goals are our goals, meaning they're not what Instagram told us to want, they're not what the rest of the industry told us to want, like the numbers actually fucking mean something to us.
Right.
Well, all of a sudden we can look at the volume. Like I've had this call with some of our high-end clients, and based on their conversions, we spit it out and like literally got clear on what their goals were, not what the industries are, but theirs.
Right.
Dude, it was like 19 doors a day. And I literally watched the energy completely shift on her face.
course. Yeah.
And her mind was blown. She doubled her production last year and then some. Her
Yeah.
life is incredible right now. And she didn't burn out in the process. The
No, because
numbers are
she's
so,
aligned it,
so
because
powerful.
you guys helped align her to her goals too. Not again, not to a corporate mandate, not to, something that was pulled out of thin air. I think
Yeah.
that's amazing. What tell
Yeah.
me about what do you guys do? Do you guys do anything on the leadership side and helping to build sales teams and helping to
Yeah.
train the leaders to really put these metrics together as well?
Yeah, a little bit. So I don't know if this will be controversial coming from to a leadership expert like
Oh,
yourself,
it's all
but
good.
I'm a believer that the number one leadership tactic that people can build, especially in sales organizations, is by developing high performance for themselves and showing up at a 10.
Yeah,
Because people don't do what we say, they do what we do. So that's why I say like, yes, kind of, because when we're working with leadership, we're still focusing on their high performance.
of
So we're
course.
digging into all of the major pillars, making sure that they're impeccable with their word, that their mindset is on point, that their limiting beliefs are non-existent, right?
No, I
Our
think that's
self-talk
great.
is dialed.
Yeah,
So that when we're working with leadership, it's really all the same stuff, just at a higher level. Like we're doing a
sure.
lot more, like Brendan's curriculum, for example, like finding those 2 to 3 millimeter shifts, the deeper work.
Mhm.
Um, but it's all pointed still at like personal development, high performance. The actions that we're scaling might shift. It might go from personal sales volume to
Yeah,
recruiting
team.
efforts,
Yeah,
for
or
example.
team sales volume, or yeah,
Yeah.
even what we were just talking about, training them how to align goals to their own individual needs instead of your needs, right? Like that's a huge leadership thing, I think. In
100%.
That's like
100%.
leadership right out of the gate.
Yeah, but we're still just focused on their personal performance and getting them dialed into a T, because I just believe that that will then trickle down, right? If we're showing up at a 10,
Yeah.
inevitably people are going to pay attention, and they're either going to get pulled up, right? To use John Maxwell like law of the lid example, when we're showing up at a 10, we're raising that lid and we're leaving all of that space for our people to come up with. Right.
Totally.
So when we're working with teams, then we're working with the individual reps as well to raise that floor, because we've opened up more space for them.
Right.
Right. But we do all of the above by getting people's personal performance dialed in.
And you guys do a lot of that through really dialing in their numbers, their metrics, what they need from a performance standpoint. And that's where I was coming back
Yeah.
to. You touched on it a little bit, but where I was saying at the beginning, like the art versus the science, and I remember when I was in corporate leadership over sales, I'd come to different markets, and it's funny because you can be in a huge corporation with thousands of sales reps, but if you get down to the local level, to the point of what we were just talking about, it's still like one sales manager with like 7 reps, and the sales manager still needs to put numbers up to make that team, not only look good, but for them to respect him, right? Sales reps don't respect people that
Yeah.
can't sell. And I remember going into markets and visiting our sales teams, and someone would be like, "Hey, we got this really big deal. So and so's got it on the hook. Do you want to go out with them and see if we can help close it?" It's like a regional account. I love doing that stuff, right? But before I'd ever do it, this kind of became like just a tactic I'd do to get people more interested in their activity numbers. But I'd say, yeah, I'd love to. But before we do that, can I see the activity report? And they bring it over. And if the standard was to make 180 calls a week and the person was at like 130, I'd go, yeah, I'd love to go, but I don't think I'm going to. And they'd say, why not? And I'd go, well, because we're going to close it. And then it's going to give you a false pretense that 130 phone calls equals success. And it just doesn't. We already know that. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that to be mean. I'm saying that not to prolong your misery. So like
Yeah.
get to 180 calls and then we can have a conversation, right? Because what you're really asking for is, can I help you on the art of sales when you're not nailing the science of sales? You know what I mean? Like you got to nail the
100%.
science of sales. Now, the beauty to me is I was able to tell sales reps with absolutely 100% certainty, if you nail the science part, which is 100% in your control, right? The showing up, the making the calls, the work ethic, right?
Yep.
If you do that, you have a job here forever. It may not be in sales, right? It probably will be in sales, but that's what leadership is here for, right? If you're doing all that stuff up front, then it's our job to come in and go, okay, what is going on at the close? Maybe you're just not asking for the order, right? What is going on?
Yeah.
Um, maybe you're not building rapport the right way or whatever it is. And that's okay. I mean, that's what coaching is there for, but all the coaching in the world cannot help you if you don't have the activity numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It always falls on work ethic. The
Yeah.
more that I've been ranting about this a lot lately, so I'll share this with you too. I'm curious of your thoughts on it, but
Sure.
like, dude, the more time I spend in this business world, the more convicted I am in my success. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way, because I don't think I'm that much better than anybody else.
You mean
But
more
my work
sure of
ethic
your
is.
methods, you mean?
No, just my work ethic.
Okay.
I believe that the more time I spend here, the more I realize that I don't believe that most people deserve the spot they're in,
Right.
because I don't think they show up the way that they should. And
Right.
I think that for people that are committed, that show up over the long term, that set good expectations, and they just pour into people, whatever industry we're in, I genuinely believe that success is inevitable.
Yes.
Because those people, I guess another way to think about it is, I learned early on, I think it might have been like Eric Worre when I spent some time in the network marketing industry. But I learned that you will always, like, your income will always drop to the level of human that you are. Like, the level of human that you are will be the thermostat. And if you don't grow into the person worthy of making $1 million a year, even if you do that once, but you're still a 250 person, it will level back out.
Totally.
And I think it's the same in business. Like, people don't deserve the spot that they're in necessarily. And if they don't grow into the person that deserves that spot and then some, they will find their way out.
Right.
Whereas people who are convicted, people who are committed, people that have that work ethic, have that discipline, have that willingness to go until, they're going to win. And they don't have to be that good. They just have to be willing to work.
It's so funny. It reminds me, when I was young, I went into the military, and I didn't go in because I had some big plan. I went in because I was a total fuck up, and I was like, college isn't really working out. I guess I'll take door B, right? So I go in the military, and I thrived in the military. And people said, "Man, you're like a super soldier, right? Like you go to all the schools, you do all this stuff, and jumping out of helicopters and whatnot." It was like, how are you doing so well in the military? And I said, because no one else is really trying that hard. And don't get me wrong, some of the best people I've ever met in my life and some of the best leaders were in the military back then. But that was the cream of the crop, right? Which I got to be part of, usually a part of those conversations. But it wasn't because I was so awesome. It was because I cared and I tried and I just showed up every day, right? To your point. And I think it's the same way. And I do think there's a lot of people who, I don't know what it is in leadership sometimes, but I think there's this mindset of I've arrived a little bit sometimes with some leaders, right? And if they ever feel that way, if you ever feel that way as a leader, I don't care if you're a local sales manager or the CEO, if you're ever sort of like, I've arrived, I'm done, right? Like I've hit it, then you are done, right? Like you're on the you've peaked and now you are on the descent. There's no staying still. But I agree with you. I mean, I think there's people in those spots. And I think if you're frustrated and under a boss like that, under a leader like that, if you can, and you like everything else about your company and your job, allow time to wash that out, because it will.
Yeah, 100%. I just like, I think, how do I want to put this? I think it will always come down to the work ethic. Right. And like, I'm just a big believer in making it completely undeniable. So if you're focused on and controlling the controllables, then no one can ever doubt it.
Right.
Like, when this is where I have to get off a soapbox a little bit, because hopefully this doesn't come out the wrong way, but it's like, dude, as my company continues to grow, the receipts are there. Like, there's no question as to why we're winning.
Right.
People can look on Instagram and like, They'll see the receipts on my story every day. They see the coffee machine at 4 a.m. They see the workouts. They see the personal development. They see me growing me. They see my team adding crazy value to our clients. Like, it's undeniable. There's no question.
Right.
So if people don't have what they want, they need to really question, like, dude, where are we not controlling the controllables? Where are we not being impeccable with our word? Where are we
Totally.
not scaling the things that actually matter, the true needle movers? Like,
Totally.
if as long as we do those things, and this is what I meant by, like, if they don't even need to be that good.
Right.
Like, I think that
They're
we
showing
just
up.
think
Just showing up is such a big deal. I mean, it's like, it sounds so
100%.
trivial, but it's such a big deal. And I like the way that you talk about it, because it sounds tough, but it's not. It's like, do you want me to BS you, like if you're a sales rep, or do you want me just to say, like, look, you're just not doing the stuff you said you were going to do, right?
It's
So
all
you have to,
easy.
so a couple of things need to, one of two things need to change, right? Either lower your standards and accept a lower quality of life or income for the
Yep.
effort that you're putting forward, or increase your effort. One or the
Yeah.
other, right? It's no different than I'm going into the gym once a month and I'm just really upset that I'm not getting stronger. You know, and it's like, well, accept the
Bingo.
new reality that you're going to be a fat ass, or like, you know, go more. It's pretty simple. And, you know, not, again, I know we're being super direct about it, but I think when you break it down that way, and when you can put analytics, that's the most important thing. I mean, if this sounds a little bit rough, I think where it sounds rough is if you're a new sales rep and you don't know the analytics right behind your business. So
Yeah.
if you do, and you should, right, then it becomes a matter of execution after that.
100%. And I think we see these stories of all of these, like, A-list celebrity level entrepreneurs, and we see them talking about how they're introverted, or how they're talking about how they were like C students, or how they talk about how they're really not that smart.
Right.
And I think it's so easy for people to fall into the trap of being like, oh, they're just saying that because they want to seem relatable.
Right.
Until you realize, like, dude, literally the only way to fail is to quit.
Right.
Like, other than that, success is inevitable.
Right.
And as long as we believe that, we understand the data, we understand our numbers, and we just go and we put in the work.
Right.
It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. And frankly, like, I got into a debate with a really good friend of mine this morning, because I put on my Instagram, and I'm like, I basically said, life, fitness, business, sales, it's all easy. And the second you stop convincing yourself otherwise, like, your
You'll
world
make
will
it hard.
change,
Yeah.
right?
You make
And
it
then
hard.
we got into the debate of, like, okay, it might be easier, but like language, I'm like, okay, bro, this is an edge case. We agree on 95% of this. Like, let's
Right.
go. But my point was the brainwashing component, right? Like, we're being brainwashed one way or another. Either we believe it's easy and it's going to be fucking easy, or we're going to believe that it's difficult, and then our brain's going to fail first. And then we're going to
Right.
call the day short. We're not going to make the dials, and we're not
Right.
going to make the money.
Right.
So we can get upset about it if we want, but at the end of the day, like, the numbers are the numbers. And if you really want the results, then, like, this is what it takes.
Right.
And that comes from a place of love. So hopefully people realize that.
No, and I think, and I'll be brief with this because we talk about it all the time in this show, and I talked about it in our last episode. I think a big thing, you talked about the thermostat earlier, right? And
Yeah.
sort of having your high and your low. And I think that's a huge part of all of this is, you know, what am I really worth? You know, if someone's earning $100,000 a year, and you know, you're their sales manager and you show them a pretty clear path to 300K, their brain may not accept that, you know, just yet. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Not
that,
yet. Yep.
until they rewire and figure out what their limiting beliefs are, and figure out, you know, kind of move that thermostat, then they're going to have a problem. And it's the same in any profession. And some people unfortunately get stuck in the same range for their life. They're like, this is just who I am. I'm a $20 an hour person, you know, and that's my
Yep.
thing. And you even push them into 30 and they're like, what, you know, this does not feel good. It's too hot in here, you know? So,
Yeah.
super interesting. Tell me a little bit more about, with the few minutes we have left, about, so I found you through your podcast, and you must be doing that for at least like 5 years, right? You're into 300 episodes or so, right? If I'm not mistaken.
260-ish.
Okay.
We launched it in December of 2019. It went live.
Okay.
But I had run another show for a number of years prior to that. So I've been running podcasts with a gap in the middle, but like aggregated probably like 5-6 years,
Cool.
7-8 years if you add the gap in the middle. But this show in particular since December 2019 with the results
Awesome.
end.
And so did that, so that when, if it was 2019, it was kind of just after you started your company, right? Like maybe a year or two after, well, not after you started
A
it, but
year or
after you went
two.
full time. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like right after I went full time. Oddly enough, the show went live as I was flying to San Diego, where we generated our first door-to-door client at that mastermind.
Okay.
But yeah, I had always loved podcasting, and I really enjoyed the other show that we ran, but I had to use Mr. Wonderful's terminology, like take it behind the barn and shoot it.
Yeah.
Because I just needed all of my money to go towards the business, right? I had moved from the Upper East Side to Jersey City across the river. And, I saved $500 a month on my living expenses, my half of everything. And I was pumping all of it towards the business. So that was a sacrifice of it. And I always wanted to get back into it, but I needed a reason. And one of my, friends and mentors, my buddy Cole Hatter, kind of like pushed me into it. He's like, dude, like you need a podcast, bro. Like, what are you doing here? So that was my permission, coming back to the permission piece. But that was it. And then we launched that show in December 2019.
Cool. And then tell me about your programs, because I know there's several, and do you do live events as well?
We do a lot of speaking at events in the niches that we work in. But yeah, I mean, we have two programs. We run launch. Our launch program is where we're working with earlier reps, really building the foundation, getting the consistency dialed in, you could say, around the KPIs that actually matter, around the action items that actually matter, starting to get a feel for the numbers in the business. And then we have Accelerator, where we're working with leadership, 6-figure guys and girls that want to get past 500,000 and $1 million, more like 2 to 3 millimeter shifts, the deeper high performance stuff. And we've done that in a number of industries. We just happen to be working with door-to-door reps right now. But even when we're working with teams, we still use those 2 mastermind incubators and just plug people into that. So yeah, that's what we're doing to help these people.
Funny because I've never done anything with solar, and the only thing I've done with door to door is try to steal some of those like Cutco reps and solar reps, like to bring them onto my corporate teams. Because if you get the right ones, they've already been through the meat grinder.
They're killers.
Yeah, they've already been through the meat grinder, so they're awesome. They get it, and they know their numbers 100%. Typically. But yeah, I mean, I think whatever industry you're coming from, and I don't care if you're in door to door, B2B, which was my background, and now recruiting. It's all the same, really, right? It's knowing your numbers. It's understanding the difference between the art and science of sales, and getting really good if you're new at the science, and then working on the art. The art will come. I mean, that's the other part, is not only will you get more help from your mentors at the art part if you're good at the science part, but you'll get more swings at the plate. Like if I'm presenting to 30 people a week instead of 10, I'm going to get 3 times faster results, probably not just because of the number of appointments, but just the amount of practice I'm getting. Right. So even those bad appointments or non-result appointments aren't bad, right? Because they're training us. So
couldn't agree more. And I think that's a very underappreciated math, I'll call it. Right. Like it's easy for us to be like, oh, well, you're getting 3 times the volume. Like you'll just get 3 times more sales. Right. And yeah, that's probably true over the long term. That will happen. But what people don't realize is that because you are accelerating that growth curve, you are getting more at bats. There's this little thing called momentum, right? And especially if, as you're getting that excess volume, you're working through those bottlenecks where you're improving your conversions. You're not just scaling your volume around the output and the dialing and the knocking, but you're also scaling your output around sharpening the axe, figuring out how to set stickier appointments, working on the close, recording your calls and dissecting it. Like all of a sudden it becomes exponential growth instead of just linear. which is
Exactly.
really, really exciting. So
Exactly, because and I'm even looking at recruiting, which I'm in now, and it's like if I'm doing more phone screens with candidates, then I get more used to talking to candidates, right? As a
yeah,
result of my output, just because of the numbers, I'm going to have more closes, of course. But in addition to that, like you're saying, I'm going to get a multiplier on that because instead of converting, one in every 8 of them into a submission into a job, now it might be one in every 6 because I'm just getting better at talking to them and better at identifying hot buttons and better at identifying, their motives. So yeah, very cool. I could geek out on this for another hour, but
you and me both.
I think we'll get started with the rest of our day. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate having you on here, Mike. And
Thanks for having me,
best
Ken.
best of luck to you and everything that you're doing, man.
Likewise, man. Let me know when you move into Nyack. We'll get together.
You got it. Hey guys, make sure to rate and follow the show. I'm supposed to say that at the beginning, and I always forget to. So we'd love to have you rate and follow the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week in the Leaders Lab.